So I'm actually super excited about this episode because I get to bring on not one, but two guests, which is something I haven't explored on the show before. And it's really fun to be able to bring two women that I absolutely adore and admire as professionals in their own respective spaces. And so the power of words is something that you hear me talk about all the time on the show, all the time on social media, how our conversations and the words that we use and how we define a reality when we hear our own voice and how we speak can impact everything we do and don't do, which in turn can change our entire life. And so I have two pros that are going to talk about this topic with me today and that are going to bring on some actionable tools, some tips that we can apply today to help us reshape the way that we use our words. And they have this remarkable ability, our words, to create a reality, right? Like our words are what we use to reflect our thoughts, to reflect our beliefs, to express our emotions. And in turn, they're going to shape how we both perceive and experience the world as a whole, right? So in our self talk, in our inner dialogue, in the conversations that we have with others, words are the key element, right? They play a vital role in the process of communications, and they can either fuel our growth or they can hinder our progress. And so let's get into it. We have two fantastic guests joining us today, and the first is Coach Tiffany Taylor. She is a master neurolinguistics programming mindset coach and master hypnotherapist. She specializes in breakthrough days for her clients, and she's helped hundreds of entrepreneurs worldwide rewire and renew their mind with her trainings, coaching, and speaking engagements. I'm so excited to have you on here today. Welcome and thank you for joining us. I'd love to know a little bit more about your experience with neurolinguistic programming and how it is the best way for us to really tap into the power of our words.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. NLP is a really fancy way of saying that we can actually map out your whole subconscious mind and emotional wiring using linguistic patterns. So when we're speaking, we're not just saying words and communicating, we're actually giving away the structure of our mind. And what we've learned is if we just change the language you're using, we can actually remap and rewire the way your subconscious goes as well. So I'm really excited to go deeper into this conversation with you today and share this with your audience.
Yeah, absolutely. And that power of the words that we use when it comes to the way that we express ourselves with other people, the words that we use to communicate in our relationships, the words that we use to communicate with each other in business with our clients. Tell me about the power that those can have in the way that we either grow in our business and life or in the way that we kind of either set ourselves back or get stuck.
So what I find interesting about NLP is NLP comes from the school of thought that your words don't describe the world around you. It actually creates it. It defines it. So when you're creating your whole internal reality, which is really important, that's what you're living day to day. That is completely separate from your external reality, what other people see. Your words will determine your quality of life. It'll determine the quality of the relationship with yourself. And of course, it'll also impact the quality of relationships you have externally as well. And as we all know, all of our personal life tends to lead into business as well. So I like to say, we don't always have just business problems. We have personal problems that bleed into business.
Oh, I love that because I'm constantly talking about how your business is a reflection of you. And so if you're not in a state of growth, you can't expect your business to be in a state of growth. If you're not being expansive and attracting the right people into your life, it's going to be very difficult for your business to be attracting the right clients into its life because it's all a reflection of who we are. And so let's talk about how do we catch ourselves when we are so used to using certain words that can be disempowering and that, like you said, are creating that kind of reality that is not the one we want. So like consciously, we know we don't want this reality, but subconsciously we continue to perpetuate it with the words that we choose to use. How do we even develop the awareness that we are in fact creating a reality that we don't want via the use of our words?
I think depending if you are more of a visual person, I really recommend journaling for this and just writing out your thoughts and ideas. Even if it's just 5 minutes in the morning, typing out what's going on in your mind, you'll start to see the language patterns that way. If you're more of an auditory person like I am, even just recording voice notes, either how you're starting off your day or recapping the end of your day, you'll start to see your language patterns there as well. I know my clients love using these modalities to see what they're thinking because especially if you're going through a hard time, if you have written out all the things that you're feeling, you're going to see what your reality looks like in your language. And you're going to be able to know where that gap is at that point, because you're going to be able to, if you're saying, I'm unhappy, I don't like my job, I feel out of balance, well, your desire is going to be the opposite of that. So that's when we start to flip the language. So we have the awareness now, and the actionable step would be to flip the language in the opposite direction, getting closer to what your ideal situation would look like.
I love that. And it all happens first with that awareness, right? And so taking the time to really slow down and step back from the learned behaviors, to step back from the patterns. It's so easy, especially when you consider yourself a productive entrepreneur, to want to do and go and like just be in the state of creating and doing and selling and pitching and just really busy in that idea that you're being productive. But the more that I study and the more that I develop my skills as a coach, the more I realize that the most powerful thing that we can do as entrepreneurs and as just people who want to improve their life in general is to take pause and step back and witness, right? And so kind of just observe, like, what are my repeated behaviors? What are the repeated words that I consistently use all the time to describe my situations? What are, even the places that I go to? What are the conversations that I keep having over and over again? And who am I having these conversations with? And so I want to dive into the who's of our lives as well, because sometimes when we are doing this type of inner work, when we are trying to expand and grow and adjust, our vocabulary and the way that we create our realities with the words that we choose, and we're being really mindful by practicing exercises like the ones that you've shared with us so far, but then we go have a conversation with our friend, our business bestie, or the people that we're used to having in our circle, and they start to use the opposite language of what we're trying to use in our life now, of what we're trying to create for our new reality. What is the best approach there? Is the approach to change the conversation? Is the approach to try to coach them to do something different? Is the approach to, change the friendship? Like, what would be your suggestion in a situation like that?
So people are so important, especially people that you will tag with some sort of title like partner, business bestie, friend. As soon as we give someone a title like that that's meaningful to us, the weight of their words actually impacts us even more. We're all very suggestible, and while we can't control what enters our mind, we can control the environment we're in. So you really want to have people around you who are speaking life into you, who are encouraging you, and who are already walking the path that you actually desire to walk as well. And so I recommend every 3 months to just take a look at the 20 people you speak to most often and ask yourself, is this someone who is really there for me? Does this person know my vision and my goals? Have we even talked about that? Do they know my values? Are they aligned with my values? So put them through the test. Are these conversations I have with this person usually positive? Is it a reciprocal relationship? Am I overgiving? Am I overtaking? Is everything balanced? I think every 12 weeks is a really good time to go through this exercise and see where you stand with someone first. Now, if you have a close friend or business bestie or something like this, and you're noticing a trend of gossip or complaining or anything like this, and you're going to know that pattern because you're going to realize every time you end a conversation, you don't feel physically well within yourself. That's when I recommend, if you've decided you want to hold on to that relationship, to reset the dynamic. And that's as simple as just having a conversation. Hey friend, I know when we talk, I realize we're getting into this pattern of talking about other people or complaining, and I'm noticing it doesn't really feel good to me. I really aspire to be the kind of person who talks about big ideas and vision and goals and personal development. And I really want most of my conversations to start reflecting that way. So I want to ask you as my friend to hold me accountable. If you see me complaining, if you see me talking about other people, can you please just call me out on it as I learn to evolve in this new iteration of me? That's my first recommendation.
I love that, because it doesn't just give it back to your friend, right? It's not like you're always doing this or you're always talking about that. It's like, hey, let's evolve together. Let's grow together. Let's see if we can empower each other to be a better, stronger version of ourselves, right? And I think it's so important that you mentioned this to be done every 12 weeks. One of the things that we have inside our Seizing Happy space is a worksheet that we want you to do all the time, where it's like, let's evaluate where you're at. It's just a simple assessment when it comes to your relationships, your health, your business, all the things. And it's okay to look and say, with loving and forgiving eyes, okay, I'm not doing so well in this space. So that's okay. I can love myself into more growth. I can love myself and coach myself, or, guide myself into a better space, right? Into the reality that I want to create for myself. And it's also okay to, if you have these conversations with your friends and you notice that it's not working, if you notice a pushback from that friend, that they're like not really even wanting to step into that, it's okay to lovingly separate yourself from people who no longer fit the future that you're trying to create for yourself. There's nothing wrong with that. You don't have to do it in a nasty way. You don't have to say, well, then we can't be friends anymore. But you can find a way to lovingly create a distance between yourself and the people who no longer suit the future that you're trying to build. And that also allows for there to be space in your life and in your Rolodex and in your text messages and in your inbox for people who do fit the future that you're trying to create for yourself. And there's nothing wrong with that. And so thank you so much, Coach Tiffany Taylor, for these amazing tips. And we're going to go into, if you can stick around, by the way, Tiffany, I'd love to have you. We're
Sure.
going to go into another part of the conversation, right? So we've talked about how the conversations with others and the words that you use with the others can impact your reality, create your reality. But how about we go a little bit deeper? And we are now going to discuss in our next segment how the inner dialogue, the conversations that we have with ourselves, affect our reality as well. So, for this next segment, I want to talk about the power of positive self talk. So, the inner dialogue, the tape recorder that we have in our minds that sometimes can be speaking life into us, but other times, most of the time, is kind of just nagging at us, right? Like it's telling us, you're not good enough. What were you thinking? It's kind of fueling that self doubt. Are you really sure you can do this? And that little nagging voice also has a very, very big impact on what we do. And so I've brought on my dear friend and a fantastic therapist, Aileen Navarro. She is a licensed mental health counselor, advanced clinical hypnotherapist, and EMDR clinician. She was born and raised in the beautiful city of Miami and has worked with in many settings throughout the community. Aileen has been a psychotherapist for 23 years and is currently, she has her private practice in the beautiful city of Coral Gables. Aileen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Gigi. And I loved everything that Coach Tiffany said. So much of what we talk about with other people and the conversations that we have really impact our inner workings. And I think it's so important to be able to identify that part of what's going on internally. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And now with you, I want to take it within. I want to discuss how our self talk and our inner dialogue is also a game changer in our lives, and how by intentionally choosing to use those uplifting, those encouraging words, we can kind of reframe our mindset also, like bolster our self belief and our confidence and our growth and the way that we, perceive and experience reality as well. So, what can you tell us about the impact of our inner dialogue and the way that it affects our daily experiences and our ability to succeed?
So the way that our inner dialogue affects the way that we feel, react, and behave is very, very important. And a lot of it has to do with behaviors and patterns that we form with our thinking. Just like we have patterns and behaviors in our everyday life, in other ways, we also have that with our thought pattern. And the most challenging part about that is that many times our thought patterns are very automatic. So many times we have a lot of thoughts that are going on in the back of our mind that have been previously programmed from belief systems or past history, and we may not be aware of it. So identifying those thoughts would really be the first step in being able to change our self-talk and have it impact our lives in a more positive way.
Yeah, that's so good. And so I'll ask you the same question that I asked Tiffany, which is how do we become aware of the inner patterns? I know that when we're talking with Tiffany, she was saying, well, when you notice that you're having those conversations with your friends, and then you kind of walk away feeling a little depleted and drained because the core of the conversation was just gossip or other people or just negative stuff, there's a physical way that you can kind of tell, like, that conversation, those words didn't really make me feel yummy. And I don't feel like I'm being, poured into, right? And then these conversations are not energizing me into wanting to be and do better. How do we spot that, but with our inner dialogue?
So many times we have to think about the later parts of our thought because that's what we're connected to. The way that our mind works is that the thought is what begins the chain reaction that we have in everything that we do. So we have a thought or a self-talk statement, and that creates an emotion or a feeling. And then that feeling will create the reaction, behavior, or action in your life. So sometimes we cannot connect to the thought right away. We can't identify, but we are more connected to the feeling or the emotion. And then obviously we all hopefully know what we're doing. So if you could connect to either the behavior or the action or reaction or the feeling, that can give you a clue as to what the thought is. And then you can work on identifying that thought. For example, if you're feeling down or you're feeling sad, then you can ask yourself, I'm feeling sad, I'm connecting with this emotion. What are the thoughts that I'm having, or what are the thoughts that I've had today that have been making me feel sad? Or if you're having a reaction that's negative, if you're isolating yourself or you're crying, you can then identify the emotion. That could be maybe you're frustrated or you're sad. And then you could go in reverse and ask, what are the thoughts that I'm having that are creating these reactions, these feelings in me? So sometimes using the emotional space to cue that you need to pay attention to the thought is an easier way of being able to identify the exact thoughts that you're having.
Yeah, and it definitely goes back to taking the pause. It goes back to stopping and observing, like, how do I feel this way? Why do I feel this way? How many times a day do I feel this way? You know, who do I feel this way with could also be, a question to ask. Like, do I consistently end up feeling this way when I hang out with this person, or when I take this action, or when I, do these things or participate in these kinds of situations, whether it's an event or, whatever. And that applies to both the good and the not so good, right? So it applies to all areas of life. And so I'm curious now, and I definitely want to bring Coach Tiffany back on, and let's talk about suggestions. Let's talk about taking action. What would you say are some easy, instantly applicable tips that we can have to, for Coach Tiffany, improve the level and quality of our conversations in our relationships, and for Aileen to improve our inner dialogue and our conversations with ourselves? Tiff, if you want to go first.
Sure. The biggest tip I can give is know your outcome. Know what kind of result you want to have. And maybe this requires some clarity. Maybe this requires having a vision. But before any conversation you have with a loved one, before you go to start your day, before you go to create your schedule, before you go to approach your whole life, know what the outcome is. And I see this even in coaching calls. Someone will come to me and say, well, I need coaching, and say, what outcome do you want? If they say, I haven't thought about that yet. So know your outcome, whether that means in conflict resolution, you're having a conversation with someone and you're just frustrated and you're feeling it. Decide what the outcome of that conversation is that you want, and then create the conversation structure from there. So know what you want to get out of life, know what you want to get out of your friendships, know what that vision looks like for your friendships. If that means, you guys are going to be grandparents sitting on the porch together or whatever that might look like, know the result you want to get. That way you can reverse engineer from there.
That's so powerful, and it's so good to think of it that way, because it's easy to apply that in life and in business if you can see the vision of what you want, to then say, well, how do I create it, right? Rather than kind of just going aimlessly through the motions and hoping that somehow you'll get there. Like when you're going somewhere new, you put it in the GPS. You don't just drive aimlessly hoping to get there, right? And so it's kind of like, let's plug in these coordinates and see how we can get there easier. So Aileen, what are your tips when it comes to our inner dialogue and the way that we refer to ourselves, talk to ourselves, about ourselves? What would be some tips there?
I love the activity of naming your self-talk and using a lot of imagery with it. So I use this activity that I think is very powerful, where you're able to identify three thoughts or negative self-talk that you want to work on, and having corrective self-talk. So then for the negative self-talk, picking imagery for it. Let's say that you want to use ants as being the imagery, and you could just imagine the negative self-talk being ants that are going into your mind And that way it becomes easier to identify whenever one of those negative statements come into your mind. You could automatically say, oh, that's an ant statement. And then you could use something more positive like butterflies as a positive corrections. And then when you use those statements, or you want to replace the negative self-talk with the positive, you could envision butterflies. And I've done this with children. We've even used, sharks and dolphins. And we've even taken it a step further, where you could use sound to also be part of the imagery to make it very strong, and smells. So you can imagine like the negative self-talk having a foul odor, and the positive self-talk having like a good smell, like lavender or something that you really enjoy smelling. And so you can use, for example, let's say that the negative self-talk is, I hate my life, or my life is terrible, and you're using a positive replacement. You can use a positive replacement like, this is temporary. And I often have people pick corrective statements that are something that they can accept at the time. So you don't want to have a corrective statement that's very over the top that your mind will not accept. Like, you're not going to pick something, if you're going through a difficult moment, like a difficult job, you're not going to pick a corrective statement that is, my life is perfect, everything is wonderful, because you're not going to really want to work with that corrective statement. So you want to pick something that's a midway goal, like, this is temporary, or I'm worthy, something that you believe that's more positive than what you're using. So it has to be something that's accepted by your mind. And then again, just the visualization of identifying the thought and saying, this is an ant thought right now. I want to change it and correct it with a butterfly thought, and then using the positive statement. And the good thing about having a list of some positive self-talk that you're working on is that you can also use it at any time. It doesn't have to be only a corrective statement that you replace a negative self-statement, but you could just use it as an affirmation throughout the day. I am worthy. This is temporary, whatever it is that you're using. And that also works in uplifting your mood and helping you feel empowered by the things that are going on in your life.
I love that. Those simple but super effective actions that we can take throughout the day to just take the small steps that are going to lead us to the places where we want to be, the ways that we want to feel, the things that we want to accomplish, the goals that we want to see kind of checked off on our list. And so thank you, ladies, so much for joining me on this episode of the Chats with GiGi podcast. I love to see the different areas of expertise and how your outward communication and your inward communication are subtly different, but also are so alike and have and carry that same amount of weight in both areas. So Aileen, Tiffany, thanks for being on the show today.
Thank
Thanks for
you. Thanks for having me.